It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind that smelled of fresh-cut grass and warm sunshine. Instead, it became the day a single innocent question uncovered a truth that had been quietly living across the street for years. I was halfway through mowing the front lawn when I noticed my 8-year-old daughter wandering toward our elderly neighbor's porch. She had always been curious, fearless, and the type of child who asked the questions adults were too polite to say aloud. I smiled, expecting another sweet conversation about flowers or birds. What happened next stopped my heart. I watched her point toward me, and although I couldn't hear every word over the hum of the mower, I saw our neighbor's face suddenly lose all its color. She covered her mouth, tears instantly filling her eyes. A few seconds later, both of us were standing completely frozen, realizing that some secrets aren't hidden because people are dishonest. They're hidden because the truth hurts too much to speak. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, forgiveness, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the Kindness Project. Your support helps us share more stories that remind the world compassion still exists. My name is Adrian Mercer, and after losing my wife 3 years earlier to a sudden illness, life had become a series of routines. Every morning I packed lunches, braided my daughter's hair as best as I could despite never really mastering it, walked her to school, worked remotely as a graphic designer, cooked dinner that rarely tasted as good as her mother's, and spent weekends trying to keep our small house looking alive instead of abandoned by happiness. Grief never really left our home. It simply learned how to sit quietly in the corner while we continued living around it. Across the street lived an elderly woman named Marisol Bennett. She had moved into the neighborhood about 6 years before my wife passed away. She was friendly enough, always waving politely, occasionally leaving fresh tomatoes or homemade bread on our porch, but she mostly kept to herself. One thing never changed, though. Every single Saturday morning, whenever I mowed the lawn, she would sit on her front porch with a cup of tea, watching silently until I finished. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I assumed she simply enjoyed being outside. Eventually it became so normal that I stopped wondering altogether. That morning my daughter, Nora, had noticed it too. She later told me that children sometimes see patterns adults become blind to. She had walked over simply to ask why Mrs. Bennett always watched us every weekend. It sounded harmless. It was exactly the kind of innocent curiosity only a child could have. The answer changed everything. Mrs. Bennett quietly admitted that watching me mow the lawn reminded her of someone she had loved more than anyone in the world. Every movement, every pause to wipe sweat from my forehead, even the way I pushed the mower in perfectly straight lines looked exactly like her son, Owen, who had died 25 years earlier in a car accident at only 32 years old. She explained that every Saturday she sat on the porch because, for one precious hour, it felt as though a small piece of her son had somehow returned. When Nora innocently asked why she never told me, Mrs. Bennett whispered that she didn't want to frighten me or make me think she was strange. She simply treasured those quiet moments from a distance because they made the loneliness a little easier to carry. By the time Nora repeated those words to me, tears were already streaming down Mrs. Bennett's face. I didn't know what to say. As a widower, I understood missing someone so deeply that ordinary moments became sacred memories. I knew exactly what it meant to search for pieces of the people we lose, in familiar songs, favorite meals, old photographs, or complete strangers whose smile somehow feels painfully familiar. That afternoon, instead of pretending nothing had happened, I carried 2 glasses of lemonade across the street. We sat together on her porch for nearly 3 hours. For the first time, she showed me photographs of Owen. The resemblance wasn't identical, but it was enough to explain everything. His posture looked like mine. His smile carried the same awkward warmth. Even our laugh, she admitted, sounded remarkably alike. She told me stories she hadn't shared with anyone in years. Stories about teaching him to ride a bicycle, cheering at his baseball games, crying at his wedding, and the unbearable silence after receiving the phone call that every parent fears. I listened. Sometimes healing doesn't require advice. Sometimes people simply need someone willing to hear their memories. From that day forward, Saturdays became different. Instead of silently watching from across the street, Mrs. Bennett joined us after I finished mowing. Nora insisted she stay for lemonade every weekend. Before long, lemonade turned into lunch. Lunch became movie nights. Movie nights became birthday celebrations. Without planning it, we became family. Neighbors began noticing the change. They watched as an elderly woman who had once barely left her porch started laughing again. They saw my daughter gaining another grandmother who happily attended every school play, every soccer game, every science fair. And something inside me healed too. Losing my wife had convinced me that our family would forever have an empty chair at every holiday. Mrs. Bennet never replaced that absence. No one could. But she reminded us that love doesn't divide. It expands. Hearts somehow make room for new people without asking anyone else to leave. Nearly 2 years later, Nora stood on the same front lawn helping me plant spring flowers. She smiled and said she was glad she'd asked that question. I smiled back because she was right. Children don't realize that honesty sometimes opens doors adults have kept locked for decades. One simple question rescued 2 lonely households. Mrs. Bennet eventually admitted something else. She said that before meeting us, she had been quietly preparing to sell her house and move into assisted living because life had become unbearably empty. Instead, she found a granddaughter who ran into her arms after school every afternoon and a neighbor who unknowingly reminded her that love never truly disappears. It simply changes shape. As for me, I learned that healing rarely arrives in dramatic ways. Sometimes it waits across the street with a cup of tea. Sometimes it watches quietly until someone is brave enough, or innocent enough, to ask why. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone you love, leave a comment, and subscribe to the Kindness Project. Your support helps keep stories of hope, compassion, and human connection alive for others who may need them today. Special request, comment below with one person you'll never stop remembering, because love lives on whenever their memory is shared. As the sun slowly settled over our quiet neighborhood that evening, I looked across the street and saw Mrs. Bennet waving from her porch while Nora waved back with both hands. In that golden daylight, I realized something beautiful. Families are not always built by blood. Sometimes they are built by loss, healed by kindness, and held together by the courage of one small child who simply wanted to know why an old woman watched her father mow the lawn every Saturday. And ever since that unforgettable morning, none of us has ever felt alone again.